And to support the work that Paul and Lillian have started, the Erickson Foundation has been a nominal co-sponsor of the conference from its inception, and we're glad to be a part of the meaning conferences, and glad that you're all here. I hope that we have some fun with this presentation. We're going to look into the grammar of art, the structure of art. We're going to take art and we're going to look at what makes art cohesive, and then we're going to take things from art and we're going to be thinking, how can I take this into my daily life? If we think that the essence of art is about experience, the essence of art is giving you an experience that makes a difference. And when we want to do some things in our daily lives, in our professional lives, we may want to take some things from art and use them. And movies certainly has been one part of this project, but the larger project is art in general. And we're going to be thinking about emotional impact. So the handouts for this presentation, they'll be posted probably later today, Monday at the latest, and you'll be able to find the handouts for this and for yesterday's workshop if you go to ericksonfoundation.org/Zeig workshops and /meaning.html. So the Erickson Foundation website, Zeig workshops /meaning.html. Now, to say that you'll find the handouts for this in PDF, there are some 250 slides for this presentation. So this presentation is actually for a couple of hours. I'm going to attenuate the presentation and show you some of the highlights from those 250 slides. You'll see that it's been a labor of love trying to bring these things together and take things from very disparate fields and use them to advance our field. And this is if this was a story, if there was a kind of epic, my epic would be the search for the Holy Grail, looking for the understructure of what makes communication effective. This is our job. How can we make communication effective in the sense of persuasion, in the sense of moving people? And the land of knowing. What we know is not necessarily what we realize. We may know that it's a good thing to exercise, that it's a good thing to eat a healthy diet, that we can change our mood, that we should be kind in relationships. These are things that we know. Do we realize what we know? And we don't necessarily realize what we know. What is the bridge between the land of knowing and the land of realizing? How can we help our clients, ourselves, to make that transition, to bridge from this place what we know to what we realize? And I'm going to entertain to you that it is the experiences that we live that help us to create that bridge. And so this presentation is going to be an experiential presentation, and the medium for the presentation is that it's not going to be this kind of presentation. It's going to be this kind of presentation where we give you some experiences that are going to help you to realize the main points of the message and not try to feed your left hemisphere with more information. We're going to explore some themes, so there is some didactic content, about persuasion and emotional impact and experiential approaches. What's the difference between a heuristic approach and an algorithm? How do we build implicit responsiveness? Our human nature, our evolutionary design is that we respond implicitly, and we don't realize the power of implicit responsiveness. We're going to look at the fact that every communication in a structure has a surface level, a psychological level. It's the psychological level of the communication that determines the outcome. As I said, the grammar of impact. How do we elicit rather than inform? To bridge the gap from the land of knowing to the land of realizing, elicitation is necessary, not informing people. What is the structure of excellence? How can we model that excellence? How can we think about changing states? For 40 years I've been practicing hypnosis, and that is about changing states. What are some of the reference experiences that we have that add cohesiveness to our personality? How can we use signals to communicate? And how can we understand something about the process of impact and persuasion? Partly this comes out of my drive to understand something about what made Milton Erickson tick. How did he work, and how did he accomplish some of the things that he did? And I think that if I use a model from art, I do much better than using a model from psychology. And I'd like to, I hope that I leave you with a curiosity and interest in exploring about experiential approaches. So this tour that I'm going to take you on, if you go to Rome and you hire a tour guide, and the tour guide is giving you the historical tour, he's going to point out every column, who made the column, the purpose of that column, the style of that column, and the reason that that column sits in that particular place. You get the historical tour. Sometimes you get a tour guide when you're in Rome and they give you the aesthetic tour. And the aesthetic tour is, look at that column. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it lovely the way the sun casts its reflection on that column and creates this shadow that moves across the forum? And then you have the aesthetic tour. This is the aesthetic tour. If we're in the land of heuristics, we are into empirically validated protocols. This is what you do. You follow this scheme. An algorithm is a series of concrete steps that leads you to a concrete outcome. If you have a science, mathematics, you use algorithms because there's going to be concrete answers. If you want to be happy in life, you can't do that by a series of concrete steps because it's not a concrete solution. And so to be happy in life, this is done by a series of heuristic processes. We make simplifying assumptions. This is the way that I do therapy. I don't follow an algorithmic formula. I make simplifying assumptions. And out of years of experience, more often than not, these simplifying assumptions work. So we're going to do this in experiential manner. And I hope that you'll play with me, because I think that you'll learn more by being and doing than you will just by passively listening. So I'd like you to do an exercise, and this is going to require you to work with a partner. And just pick the person next to you. And then decide who is going to be the pitcher and who is going to be the receiver. This is an arbitrary designation. Pitcher and receiver, just decide among you. Okay? Stop. Okay. The job of the pitcher is to just take 5 seconds and look at the receiver, and look at the receiver as if you're seeing the receiver with new eyes. Just look at this person meaningfully and value this person with your interest. I'll count to 5. Look at the person meaningfully. See that that person gets your connection, that you value this person. You're seeing him with new eyes, or with new eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if you're the receiver, just say a few phrases about what that was like to the pitcher. Okay, stop. Now, probably that was good. And good is nice. And can we make good excellent? So let's see if we can add excellence to good and make it better. So keep the same roles. Now, this time, what I'd like you to do is to do a 3-step process. I'd like the pitcher to just look for a moment at the floor And then I'd like the picture to start to just gradually look up in a stepwise manner, smiling. And then I'd like you to look at the neighbor, look at your partner, who it is that you're looking at, and then I'd like you to make a sound that represents your interest. So it would be like slowly looking up, smiling. Ah. And then exit with a gesture of gratitude, a gesture of appreciation. So it would be a little dramatic, but not traumatic. Not like Charlie Chaplin, but just slowly looking down, smiling, looking up, seeing the person, making a sound, and then exiting with a gesture of gratitude. And then see what the impact is of doing that. Please. Now, what's the impact when you do that? And when you use this process, a very simple process, if you were thinking about playing tennis, you would be thinking about the same process. You would be thinking about what you do to set something up, what you do to intervene, and what you do to follow through. And you would understand that the power of the stroke of tennis comes from the process of presentation and not just from the moment of impact of the racket against the ball. Now, this was Milton Erickson, and this was the way that he communicated. He communicated in triplets. What you do to set up, what you do to intervene, what you do to follow through. Once I could get that pattern and I could institutionalize that pattern, my communication became much more effective, much more impactful. So my project that I want to entertain you with is about the art and science of impact. Not that there's so much science, but there is some science that indicates it. And that it's not really so much what you say that really makes the difference, it's how you say it. And we're looking at art because art is evocative, the nature of art is evocative, and that when it comes to outcome, it's not necessarily what the facts are, but it's more what you experience that makes the difference. A very small kind of parallel. If you look at the X and you just stare at that X, suddenly those purple flashing lights are going to turn green. Now, they're really not green, but your perceptual system is not dealing with the facts, it's dealing with what you create. If you make your vision soft focus, you're going to see the green dot moving in a circular fashion. That's apparent movement. If you just soften the focus of your eyes, it's really not moving in a circle, it's just flashing lights. But it's not the facts, it's your experience that determines the outcome. When you look at this figure and you start to see dark spots in the spaces, they're not there. But it's your experience that creates them. They're not real. We're going to do a little a game here to illustrate another one of the points in the presentation. We're going to look at paired associates. If you're an undergraduate student, you study Psychology 101, you have done experiments with paired associates. You go into the laboratory, you learn these list of words, there's an intervening variable, you have a cup of coffee. Does caffeine increase your recall of these paired associates? So here is a list of paired associates. For example, if I say body, You say, house, month, arm, room, ocean, hour, tree, finger, wall, minute. So then now we would have a test, and if I said body, right. But that's really not the test. Because this is a social psychology experiment. What's the first word that you think of when you associate to the word hand? Fingers. What's the first word that you associate when you think of table? Legs, chairs. What is your favorite laundry detergent? Tide. How many people say Tide? When this experiment was actually done, the groups that were primed with ocean moon were much more likely to say Tide as their favorite laundry detergent than groups that were not primed with ocean moon. Now, the people in the experiment said, well, but Tide has always been my favorite laundry detergent, but when the experiment was done, a statistically significant percentage of the time, more people who were primed with that ocean moon paired associate mentioned Tide as their favorite laundry detergent. This has to do with implicit responsiveness. This is the world of priming, and there is science that indicates that priming works, changes not only behavior, thinking, emotion, motivation, and can have enduring effects. So the priming that you were just subjected to learn something about your own implicit responsiveness, which, by the way, was the level of intervention at which Milton Erickson worked, was that you were associated to parts, because the list was, this is a category, these are parts. Also, on the left-hand side, these are singular, these are plural. So you are being primed to think about parts and plurals and Tide by your exposure to these paired associates. And this is part of the way in which poetry works, movies work, literature works. It's a Gestalt principle of closure. You create closure by virtue of the clues that you experience, and that's what makes ideas come alive in all senses when you have very simple mediums like poems and music. So implicit responsiveness, that elicits an emotional response. We're going to do a little opera, a little Rossini, and I'm going to play you two sopranos, and one of them is good, really good, and the other is over-the-top excellent. One of them has studied singing and is a great soprano. The other one is a coloratura soprano who is an expert in bel canto opera. So you're going to listen to two selections, and let's see how you feel the difference from the embellishments of an opera singer who really understands what Rossini expected of the singer compared to a soprano who is just singing, very good, what Rossini actually wrote. See that you tell the difference. I would advise you to just close your eyes and listen. Do we have a sound? We had sound. What? I thought it was there. This is not the test of indirect suggestion. No, you keep going. It's okay. It's playing? What?
Il mio cor ferito è già ed indoro che Jacob si indoro mio sarà lo giurai la vincerò si indoro
soprano number 1. Now, soprano number 1 was the soprano that was trained in bel canto opera. And she added embellishments, and I hope that you could feel that that led you to greater emotional impact. Now, the soprano number 2 was good. She's a beautiful voice. But there's something that soprano number 1 did that led us to suddenly realize more of the impact. And what I've been trying to do is to look at different artists and study what those artists do and try to piece together some of the things that happened in literature, in music, in choreography, in theater, in poetry, that we can take that are elements of impact and apply those into our daily life by modeling the excellence in art, unpacking what art's about, if you like, deconstructing art, looking into the grammar of emotional impact. I think that my muse for this started in the early 1970s because I remember seeing in Esquire magazine Alan King as he deconstructed one of his jokes. And then I recently went to the trouble, which was not so easy, of actually finding the November 75 issue of Esquire magazine. And this is what I read in the mid-1970s. This is Alan King, and he is telling a joke. And as he's telling the joke, he's deconstructing everything that he did. And in the red, you see moment to moment the gestures, the tone, the tempo of his voice, the setup, and he is explaining, and it's a terrible joke. It's not even a good joke. But the delivery is so good, so thoughtful, that he makes that joke come alive. And this is an expert who is looking into the structure of his own art and describing moment for moment. This is what we did with Milton Erickson. We looked at what Erickson did, gesture for gesture, moment for moment, response for response, and studied the way in which he structured impact. And like Alan King, Erickson was capable of describing the intricacies of what he did. I've never seen a therapist who was that precise in their communication. Also in that magazine, there was Donna McKeechee, who was explaining how to do a time step, and Rich Little, who was deconstructing how to imitate Humphrey Bogart, deconstructing their work. So if we really want to advance our field, I think we'll do best by taking ideas from other fields and applying them into our clinical work. And I've been especially interested in filmmakers because film has been such a multimodal form of art, but I don't know that we'll actually take a look at any film today. We'll see if we have time. But also I've been learning from social psychologists who have been doing research that is relevant, but that's a long ellipsis because we have more to learn from filmmakers than we do from social psychologists. Now, Jeff mentioned in his introduction that I have been working with Alex Vesely. Viktor Frankl was a friend, if I dare to say that. We met Viktor Frankl for the first time in 1990 and became a friend of the family. And then Alex Vesely, Viktor Frankl's grandson, became interested in hypnosis. He's now more interested in making film, has given up on his psychotherapy practice. And so together we're making a documentary on this project, on the science of impact. I'm going to show you the trailer that Alex and I made of the interviews that I've been doing with creative people. There's 3 streams to this documentary. One is, what is it that creative people do? Next week, I'm interviewing Stan Lee of Marvel Comic Books, and I'm going to talk with him about the structure of comic books and how comic books have impact, and see if I can find some codes in comic books that we can apply in psychotherapy and in life. So this gives you some idea of what I'm doing. It's outrageous about who you can connect with if you have a camera and a documentary crew and a trailer. Here's the trailer. Here we are at a university. This is a place of ideas. It's a place of facts. It's a place where you get degrees. I have 3 degrees. I have BS, MS, PhD. Bullshit, more shit, and pile higher and deeper. But they're my degrees of freedom. They allow me to do things. What they did was they taught me facts. I learned the number of lumens of illumination you needed for dark adaptation in the human eyeball. I learned to name the blind legless salamanders of the Ozark Plateau in southeastern United States. I didn't learn how to be a better Jeff Zeig. I didn't learn how to communicate with impact. I didn't learn how to express myself in a way that I could really make a difference in people's lives. If you want to learn about how to be a better person, how to be more effective in communication, follow me. Let's take the journey. We're going to do this by looking at what creative people do, looking at the structure of what they do. We're going to interview a world-famous director. We're going to interview a world-famous musician. We're going to talk to top neuroscientists, top psychologists whose work defines today. Art is about communication.
And wrinkle your nose. Now, what we know from our research is if you do that, you start to have all the physiology discussed.
I go into my occupation, I want to heal myself.
I think all artists or people like we who are on the stage are dopamine junkies.
What is it that you would like to get some coaching on?
I'm really bad at procrastination.
Be a better person. Art is about emotional impact.
To have the dots explained to them is one thing, but to have them experience them on their own, even when their person they came to the movie with doesn't know what the hell's going on.
To be able to just wade into the water.
Right.
And just trust that you're going to come up with something.
You're a split personality when you're doing this writing. And that's the journey is so rewarding when it works, is that you played all the parts, you know.
It's to reduce the emotional gap between you and them.
It's connected to God, it's connected to sex. It's like, no wonder she cries, oh God, when you make her happy.
Entertainment and aesthetics isn't something that you can do or not, because I think that emotions should be seen as in the center of life.
It's from art we can learn about emotional impact. Fun, huh? So I have my cameraman. We're on Market Street in San Francisco. It's the middle of the day. I'm pulling people off the street and I'm saying, would you like 5 minutes of street therapy? And so, of course, in San Francisco on Market Street, it's very easy to find people who want street therapy. And then I'm just picking out of a hat some technique that I have learned from artists, and I'm trying to apply it in a 5-minute session on the street to see, can I really have impact in a very short period of time, helping somebody with something real to empower them to do something that they haven't been able to do before. So that was very fun and part of the project. Impact, by its very nature, needs to be weird. If we are constrained to the traditional, we're going to limit ourselves as far as impact is concerned. Television, movies, music, theater, painting, it's weird. Artists know that you need to be weird. Poems are weird. The construction is weird, but that's what has emotional impact. As psychotherapists, when we feel constrained to be concrete, direct, and to the point, we limit ourselves. Some of the greatest psychotherapists were really weird. Freud was weird. And imagine in Victorian times, you know, psychotherapy is 125 years old today. It was 1885 that Freud first became interested in the psychological aspects of medicine. Imagine at that time that you're being asked to lie down on a couch with the therapist sitting behind you. You're looking at the ceiling and you're saying whatever comes to your mind. That is so weird. And of course, people got better very quickly. And then it became systematized, and then there became rules and algorithms for how you should do it, and then people started getting better slowly. But the weirdest of all the therapists was Erickson, and he was, very weird, dressed in purple, spinning stories, wearing Western ties, and doing hypnosis, talking in riddles and allegories and illusions. Doing hypnosis. It was very strange, and people got better very quickly. Yeah. So Erickson, out of all of the therapists that I've ever studied, was the most radically experiential. I could say to you that at 6+ years of being Erickson's student, that over that time he never taught me facts. 6.5 years of intermittently studying with him was all about getting experiences, and suddenly these experiences would be dropped in my lap, and I would realize something new. And when I started to try to understand by using psychological theory, I couldn't. But when I looked at the structure of art, this is what artists do, this is what Milton Erickson did, suddenly they're the same. So, well, signals. Because I said that we would look at the power of signals, and that will be part of our exploration today. I have 2 examples about the power of signals. The first one I got off of the internet. This is the difference between Eastern and Western culture communicated in signals. I hope you can see from the back of the room. I'll go through a couple of them. So this is Western people, how they form an opinion. This is people from Asian culture, how they form an opinion. The way of life in Western culture, the way of life in Eastern culture. Punctuality in Western culture, this was done especially in Germany, punctuality in Eastern culture. Contacts in the West, contacts in the East. Anger, you can't see that from the back of the room, but both of them are smiling outwardly or inwardly. Queuing when waiting in the West, queuing when waiting in the East. Sundays on the road in the West, Sundays on the road in the East. What you do at a party in the West, what you do at a party in the East. In the restaurant, traveling, handling of problems. 3 meals a day. Transportation, 1970 to 06, 1970 to 06. Elderly in everyday life, elderly in the West with the dog, elderly in the East with the grandchild. Moods and weather and the boss. Now, you don't need to read a textbook on cross-cultural psychology. All you need to do is to look at these symbols, and these signals communicate an experiential understanding. When you use a signal, suddenly you get it. Now, this is something that I've used in my office, and I use it frequently, not just for people who come to me for dieting. This comes from a book, I forgot the name of the author, but the book is called The Picture Perfect Diet. When I was a boy, having a black and white cookie was heaven. To go to the delicatessen and to find a black and white cookie, share it with my sister, that was heaven. So I looked in the book, and there's a black and white cookie, and over the black and white cookie, 4.5 ounces, it says 640 calories. Now, on the next page of the Picture Perfect Diet, this is what you could have for 640 calories. So for 640 calories, you could have this, or for 640 calories, you can have this. Now, once I saw that picture, at that moment that I saw the picture, I suddenly realized I'm never going to have another black and white cookie again in my life. Because I can't get that image out of my mind, that on the left-hand side of the page is this, on the right side of the page is this. Here's a scone. 1 scone equals 700 calories. Here's what you could have for 700 calories. I went into a restaurant in California that specialized in scones. I couldn't look at the basket. Suddenly I had that image in my mind of seeing that picture. So in this case, a picture is worth 1,000 calories. Our fundamental thesis is that clients come to us because they want to change their states, and perhaps they want other people to change theirs. We need to have a technology that helps us to understand how to change states. We change people's states by the experiences that they live. When I met with Paul Ekman, we were talking about discrimination between emotions, moods, and states. He's an expert in emotion, facial expression. So to him, emotions are fleeting. Moods, they are more chronic, like a depressed or an anxious mood. But states are something that really are not in his purview because they are an amalgamation of moods and emotions and behaviors and attitudes. Motivation, being assertive, being passive, these are states. They're not emotions. When our patients come to us, they're stuck in states, being apathetic. We need to help them to move out of their apathy. We need a technology that helps us to understand the composition of states and how people change their states, which is one of the reasons that I've studied hypnosis as long as I have. I have a model there, but I'm not going to take you there. My thesis is that problems, they're probably located in subcortical regions of the brain. If you know Dan Siegel's work, you know that he uses a model of the brain where he holds up his arm, he says, this is the spinal cord, this is the brain, and this is the cerebellum, this is the reptilian brain, your thumb, should be two of them, would be your limbic system, your mammalian brain, your cortical layers of your brain that sit on top and connect the limbic system and also the cerebellum. Now, if the problems existed in prefrontal cortex, we wouldn't have a job as psychotherapists. People would just think their way through. So problems, I think, exist at more subcortical layers, and if we want to help people, we need therapies that reach subcortical layers, not just giving people information. Sometimes people need information and they benefit from it, but animals, they communicate experientially, they use signals, but so do movie makers and poets and novelists, artists. They communicate experientially because we want to reach people at a more primitive level, a more basic level. Visual codes. I give you a couple of quick examples of visual codes to understand some of the grammar of how we work. And mostly these codes are invisible to us. They're not information. They're just things that we respond to. And some simple examples. This line for Western people is sloping down compared to this line, which is sloping up. Now, they're just lines. But we immediately understand this is down, this is up. We know that this is going to the future and that this is going to the past. We don't have to be told that. We immediately know that if I gesture this way, for you this way, I'm going into the future. If I gesture this way, for me, I'm going into the past. This plane, is this plane going home or going away? Well, we know that compared to this plane is going away. Movie makers know that. So when you see the plane going in this direction, you don't have to think about it. Immediately, you get the felt sense, the realization, this plane is going away, this plane is going home. Good comes from left to right. In the old Western movies, the good guy with the white hat would come in from the left side of the screen, while the bad guy would come in with the black hat from the right side of the screen. This is code. And movie makers understand this because we read in the West from left to right. Things that move from left to right are intrinsically more pleasant to us. Things that come in from right to left are less pleasant. These people would be judged more good, except for the coloration, compared to these people who are coming in from right to left. In written communication, there are codes that novelists use that are invisible to us. And yet any good novelist immediately knows to use this kind of code in their writing. Hemingway, Faulkner, Dostoevsky, they know that there are things that create impact in sentence structure. This is a low-impact sentence. These are difficult times. That's very low impact. Contemporary events are stressful. That's still a low-impact sentence. Trying times affect one's being, low impact. But these are the times that try men's souls, and you can't forget that sentence. It's created in a form that has high impact, and there's a code that writers do that we can discern that creates things that have more impact. Tide brought you this message. That is low impact. But if we change the sentence slightly, this message was brought to you by Tide. That has impact. If you put your message as the object of the sentence rather than the subject of the sentence, it's going to have more impact, at least in English. So if we can understand a little bit about these codes, we create things that are unique. Here's a more complex example of what good writers do. Once I could understand this code in writing, I could immediately apply it to hypnosis, which is a cumulative sentence, a kind of compound sentence with free modifiers. And these are hypnotic. So a cumulative sentence would be, we're here, which is a sentence, with a series of modifiers. We're here, listening carefully, avidly understanding, a process by which we learn, a process of discovery, a process of personal realization. Now, I just used a compound sentence that I just made up on the spot with free modifiers. And I studied the structure of sentence, of how writers write, and if you have a sentence followed with some phrases and use adverbs, direct objects, gerunds, and repetitions, you create a sentence that has high impact. And then I started using this when I was creating hypnotic inductions. Sentence, we are here. Phrase, avidly listening. But it's a free modifier, so it could be avidly listening, we are here. Using a gerund, understanding some of the things that are being expressed. Repetition, expressions that have meaning. Using a gerund, meaning that guides us. Repetition, meaning that directs us. Repetition, meaning that helps us to discover something that's intrinsically important in personal ways. Once I understood the structure, this is the way novelists write, I could start creating sentences that just build on each other and use something from an implicit code in writing that can be applied in psychotherapy and in my own writing. So, I'm going to pass by this. But actually, the project came about because 2 years ago, Alex was in my home, Alex Vesely, Frankel's grandson. He was in my home, and we were sitting in front of a movie, and he took 5 minutes to explain to me, to deconstruct the movie, and to help me, because he had studied with this dramaturge, very famous in Austria, Christian Mukunda. And Christian Mukunda has a scheme for understanding impact in art and architecture. Alex cued me into this, and so that suddenly became a defining moment in my life. And the next 2 years, these last 2 years, have been dedicated to start to deconstruct and to understand and to think about how we can bring things from art into everyday processes. One of the problems that we have as psychotherapists is that we don't do what artists do. Artists explore their medium, and they're continuously looking for the ways in which they can take their medium into a territory that it's never been before. And this is the purview of art. But for psychotherapists, we don't do that. Our medium is communication, but we don't look at what it's possible to do with communication. And that's what I'm trying to tease you into, to look at the variations that are possible in communication and to start to think, how can you use that kind of art, drama, in empowering your messages? But just for a little, exposition, at first painting, there was no photography. So painters had to be very realistic. But with the advent of photography, you could have a painting that's an impression, which didn't have to be realistic anymore, because photograph could be realistic, and now artists could explore just using some lines to create impressions. Well, that implicit code in that is that Monet understood that he could use vagueness. If Monet could use vagueness, we should be able to do that and create impressions that make simple things come to life. In Ericksonian therapy, you could call that being indirect. Post-Impressionists using detail and precision. If Seurat could use extraordinary precision, we could use extraordinary precision in our communication. If Matisse could use color combinations, and we could harness some unusual things to create impact. If Braque could deconstruct things into lines, we could destabilize, and we could use destabilization in our communication. I'm just orienting you now. Modigliani using symbols, Dali using multiple levels, making things really weird. Abstract, we could make things abstract in our work, explore the use of abstraction. Hyper-realism, emotional comic exaggeration, even reshape the canvas, reframing things. Now, when I saw Van Gogh's masterpiece, The Potato Eaters, in the Rijksmuseum in Holland, I was stunned. Beautiful painting, his first masterpiece, but it was the sketches and studies, how precise he was. Lots of these sketches themselves were masterpieces. So again, artists explore the limits of their medium, and we should be able to do something with that too. And this is about either science, information, or poetry, emotional response. If I wanted you to understand the science of trees, I could talk with you about the classification and the morphology of trees. What would happen to you? No emotional impact. But if I wanted you to understand something about trees, and I show you a tree, and you allow yourself to feel the impact of a tree, it's a much more impactful emotional experience. If Robert Frost is confined to using words to help you to realize a tree, and he writes, "Tree at my window, window tree. Your sash is lowered when night comes on, but let there never be curtain drawn between you and me. Vague dream head, lifted out of ground, and thing next most diffuse to cloud. Not all of your light tongue speaking aloud could be profound." I memorize poetry as a hobby because I understand that poetry is weird and has impact. Robert Frost said a poem should enter with delight and exit with wisdom. Psychotherapy should enter with delight and exit with wisdom. And Robert Frost talks about a tree as a vague dream head lifted out of ground. That is weird. And he talks about leaves as light tongues. That is weird. But you feel the impact because he's exploring the limits of what can be done in language. Let's skip to Beethoven, because Beethoven has been an inspiration. I think if you wanted to learn about hypnosis, impact, you could learn more by listening to Beethoven. And we'll listen to the sixth, just a minute, of Beethoven's fifth. This is, we think, that's Chopin. Different. What I did was I said to Philip Zimbardo, I'm going to play you Beethoven's fifth. We looked at a minute of Beethoven's fifth, and I said, okay, Phil, you're not only an excellent social psychologist, you're an excellent teacher. How could you use the elements in Beethoven to improve your teaching? And then I think we'll need to stop close to it. Beethoven, foremost. Freaking beautiful. It's amazing that anyone could do that. So I said, okay, Phil, those are the four most famous notes in Western music. And what Beethoven does is he enters immediately. Now, this is the same thing that Tolstoy did in Anna Karenina. You jump into action. Now, Melville, in writing Moby Dick, 400 pages before you got to the Battle of the Whale. And he did an introduction which is actually more similar to the Chopin piece that if I had time, I would have played for you. I said, okay, Phil, if you're doing that teaching and you want to do the same technique that Beethoven did, jump into action, what would you do in your teaching? I said, okay, well then if you wanted to do what Melville did or what Chopin did, and you wanted to improve your teaching by going da 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 bum ba dum, how would you use that? I said, okay, Phil, what Beethoven did is that he didn't use repetition, he used recursions. So he went ba 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 bum, ba 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 bum, ba 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 bum, ba 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 bum. He didn't repeat, he did slight variations. I said, okay, Phil, here's a code that Beethoven used to have emotional impact. How would you do this in your teaching? How would you use this in psychotherapy? How would you use recursions rather than repetition? I said, okay, Phil, here's contrast in Beethoven. Beethoven presents his theme, we could call it the fate theme, in C minor. And then he follows by the same kind of theme in C major. You don't remember the C major part because it's the C minor part, fate versus hope, that has impact. How would you create contrast in your teaching with a theme of fate, starting with fate, ending with hope? And in the Fifth Symphony, hope eventually wins. I said, okay, Beethoven uses a modulating bridge. He uses a single horn to make the transition between C minor and C major. How would you use something like this in psychotherapy? How would you use this in teaching, Phil? I said, okay, Beethoven uses a false cadenza. He starts to end that movement, and then he doesn't. How would you use that principle if you wanted to have impact? Let's take things from art and apply them into our daily life and into science. So I think that as much as I would really enjoy teaching more of what I had in this program and looking at a clip from a movie, and I think that I have really come to the end of my time, not to the end of my thinking or to the end of my presentation. I'd like to just very quickly tell you just a little bit about the Erickson Foundation. We have lots of things that we do at the Foundation, and I'd really be glad if you took advantage of it. We organize conferences on couples, on brief therapy, on the evolution of psychotherapy. We have products from our conferences over the years, 30 years of organizing conferences. And I left some literature on the table that could give you a little interest and a little orientation. Our next conference is in Orlando. That's our brief therapy conference. Features some of the greatest names in contemporary psychotherapy, some great keynote speakers, Sue Johnson, Judith Beck, Bessel van der Kolk, and Donald Meichenbaum. We're having a special tribute to 91-year-old Thomas Zaz. And we've also invited Robert Sapolsky, one of the great neuroscientists of today, whose area of expertise is especially stress, wrote a book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. He's going to be one of our keynote speakers. So again, my appreciation to Paul and to Lillian and to all of you for being here, and thanks so much for the opportunity to share some of my enthusiasm about this project. Appreciate it.